The scent of lemon oil and beeswax was a shield. Amina worked the soft cloth over the dark grain of the tabletop, her movements economical and precise. Here, in this vast, silent house, precision was everything. It was a language understood by the owner, a man who spoke in clipped sentences and waited stillness. Each polished surface, each perfectly aligned book on his shelves, was a verse in a conversation she had without ever speaking. She was a ghost in his world, a pair of capable hands that erased the evidence of living, leaving only sterile perfection behind. Today, the silence felt different. It was heavier, charged with an energy that prickled the skin on her arms. She knew he was home. The air changed when he was present, growing colder, thinner, as if he consumed all the warmth and oxygen for himself. She kept her focus on the wood grain, her reflection a distorted blur on the gleaming surface. She did not need to see him to know he had entered the library. A shadow fell over the table. She didn't look up, continuing her circular motions. The rules were simple. Be invisible. Be efficient. Do not engage unless engaged. Stop. The word was not loud, but it cut through the quiet like a shard of glass. Her hand froze. Slowly, she straightened, turning to face him. He stood by the towering shelves, a stark figure in a black suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed molded to him. It was Tom Ford. She knew from the label she'd seen on the one he'd discarded on his bed last week. His white shirt was a slash of light against the dark wool, the collar unbuttoned just enough to reveal the black ink coiling up the side of his neck, the tail of a dragon or a serpent. His name was Ryo Tanaka, and he was the master of this house, and she was beginning to understand a significant portion of Tokyo's underworld. His face was a mask of cold, aristocratic beauty, all sharp angles and unforgiving lines. But it was his eyes that held the true power, dark, depthless, and utterly devoid of warmth. They were fixed on her now. "I need to speak with the head housekeeper," Amina said, her voice steady. Her gaze was fixed on a point just over his shoulder. "Another rule. Do not make direct eye contact." "You will speak with me," he corrected.
It was not a request.
She finally met his eyes. It was like stepping off a ledge. The air left her lungs in a quiet rush. He moved like the room owed him space, crossing the distance between them without a sound. He stopped just on the other side of the table, the polished wood a continent between them. "There is a matter I must attend to this evening," she began, her voice a carefully modulated monotone. "I will have my duties completed, but I will need to leave at 6 o'clock, rather than my usual 7. His expression did not change, but a subtle tension entered his posture. He placed his hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. His fingers were long and elegant, the nails immaculately clean. On his right pinky, a simple silver ring. On his left wrist, the hint of more ink, a complex tapestry of shadow and line disappearing beneath a pristine French cuff. "A matter," he repeated. The words were flat, inquisitive. "What kind of matter requires you to alter the schedule of this household?" Her heart began a slow, heavy beat against her ribs. This was the part she had dreaded.
It was a simple request.
A human request. But in this house, she was not a human. She was a function, a component of the perfect, silent machine he had built around himself. "I have a personal engagement, sir." "Be specific, Amina." The sound of her name on his lips was jarring. He said it differently than anyone else. Not with the soft, lilting cadence of the other staff, but with a hard, possessive edge, as if the word itself belonged to him. She swallowed. "I have a date." The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched and thinned until she thought it might snap. He did not blink. His dark eyes scanned her face, searching for something she couldn't name. She felt stripped bare, as if he could see the cheap dress she planned to wear, the hopeful flutter in her stomach, the simple, desperate desire for a few hours of normalcy. "A date," he said again, the words tasting like a foreign language in his mouth. He straightened, his gaze dropping to her hands, which were still clutching the polishing cloth. "With whom?" "His name is Satoshi," she said, her chin lifting a fraction. "He's a student at the university." "I see." He walked around the table, his steps deliberate. She held her ground, refusing to retreat, though every instinct screamed at her to do so. He stopped beside her, so close she could smell the faint, clean scent of his cologne, something crisp and cold, like cedar after a winter rain. "You may leave at 6, he said, his voice a low murmur near her ear. She felt the warmth of his breath against her skin and fought the urge to flinch. "But you will take my car. And my driver. And you will be back before 10-inch. It was not an offer of convenience. It was a leash. "That's not necessary, sir. The restaurant is near the train station." He turned his head, his eyes locking with hers. "It is necessary. This city is not safe for a woman alone at night." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "Especially a woman who works in this house." The implication was clear. She was his. Her safety was his concern because she was his property. The thought was both terrifying and, to her shame, strangely thrilling. "As you wish, sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He gave a curt nod, the dismissal absolute. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the vast, silent library. The air still vibrated with his presence. She looked down at her hands. They were trembling. That was the moment everything changed. She had come here for a job, for a way to survive in a foreign city. But she was no longer just a maid. She was now his problem to solve. The date was a disaster of normalcy. Satoshi was kind, handsome in a boyish way, with an easy laugh that felt alien after months spent in the tomb-like silence of Ryo's mansion. He talked about his classes, about a funny professor, about his dream of opening a small bookstore one day. It was all so wonderfully, painfully ordinary. Amina found herself nodding and smiling, but her mind was elsewhere. She was acutely aware of the black sedan parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the neon glow of the restaurant sign. She could feel the driver's unseen eyes on her back. She kept checking the time on her phone, the numbers glowing ominously. 8:47, 9:12, 9:31. "Is everything okay?" Satoshi asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "You seem distracted." "I'm sorry," she said, forcing a brighter smile. "I just have a strict curfew. My employer is very particular." "Your employer?" He leaned forward, intrigued. "What do you do?" "I'm in domestic management," she said, the lie tasting like ash. "For a private residence." Before he could ask more, she saw the time. 9:45. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. "I have to go." "I'm so sorry." She stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. His face fell, a mask of confusion and disappointment.
Oh.
"Okay. Can I walk you to the station?" "No," she said, too quickly. "My ride is waiting." His gaze flickered past her, toward the dark car outside. A flicker of something, recognition, or perhaps fear, crossed his face. "That's your ride? Who do you work for?" "I really have to go." She turned and fled, not looking back. Outside, the air was cool. The driver, a stone-faced man named Ito, was already holding the rear door open for her. She slid inside, the door closing with a heavy, final thud that sealed her off from the world of normal university students and bookstore dreams. As they pulled away, she saw Satoshi still standing in the restaurant doorway, a small, confused figure in a world she could no longer belong to. The drive back was silent. The city lights blurred into streaks of color outside the window, but she saw none of it. All she could think about was Ryo. When they arrived, the house was dark except for a single light burning in his office on the second floor. Ito escorted her to the door. "Tanaka-sama is waiting for you." Her blood ran cold. She hadn't expected to see him. She had expected to slip back into her small room, back into her invisibility. She found him in his office, a space of minimalist design. Black leather, chrome, and glass. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the glittering expanse of Tokyo. He didn't turn when she entered. "You are 4 minutes late," he said, his voice calm. The traffic was heavy. "I apologize." He finally turned. In his hand was a heavy crystal tumbler holding a single, perfect sphere of ice and a measure of amber liquid. Tell me about your date. It was not a question. It was a demand for a report. It was fine, she said, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. He is a student of literature. His father owns a chain of dry-cleaning businesses. He has a small gambling debt owed to a man named Kenji, who is an associate of a rival clan. Rio took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes never leaving hers. Did you know this? Amina's mouth went dry.
No.
This is the normal you seek? He asked, a hint of something that might have been derision in his tone. A boy with dangerous connections who sees you as a curiosity. He didn't know who I worked for. But he does now, Rio countered, setting his glass down with a soft click. He saw the car.
He saw Ito.
He will talk. People always talk. He moved from the window, circling the large desk to stand in front of her. You were a ghost in the city, Amina. Now you have a face. A connection. You have made yourself a liability. Fear, sharp and acidic, rose in her throat. What are you going to do? Satoshi's debt has been forgiven, he said, the word hanging in the air with chilling finality. He will be transferring to a university in Kyoto. He will not be returning to Tokyo. He will forget he ever met you. The cold, surgical way he had just erased a person from her life was more terrifying than any overt threat. He had reached out and plucked a thread from her past, incinerating it completely. She felt a wave of dizziness. You had no right, she whispered. His eyes flashed with something dangerous. In 2 steps, he was in front of her, his presence overwhelming. He lifted a hand and she flinched, but he didn't touch her. His fingers hovered just inches from her cheek. Everything in this house is my right, he said, his voice a low, possessive growl. Everyone in this house is my responsibility. I do not tolerate liabilities. I eliminate them. He was so close. The cold scent of cedar was mixed with the faint, peaty aroma of the whiskey on his breath. She should have been terrified. A part of her was. But another, deeper part of her felt a strange, dark pull. He was a monster, a predator. But he had, in his own brutal way, protected her. It was in that moment, under the intensity of his gaze, that she saw it, a flicker of something behind the cold mask. It was not kindness. It was a raw, desperate fear. The fear of loss. It was there and gone in an instant, but she saw it. It was the key to the man behind the monster. My sister, he said, his voice suddenly quiet, almost rough. He seemed to be speaking to himself more than to her. He finally let his hand drop. Her name was Hannah. She liked to paint. She fell in love with a musician, a civilian. I told her he was a weakness. A loose thread. He turned away, walking back to the window. Our enemies found that thread, and they pulled. He didn't need to say the rest. The story was etched in the rigid line of his shoulders, in the hollow emptiness of the vast, silent house. He was surrounded by beautiful, priceless things, but the house felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a failure he could never outrun. He saw his sister in every potential threat, every loose thread. He saw her in Amina. I am not your sister, she said softly. He turned back, his face unreadable. No, he agreed. You are not. The silence between them was not empty. It was filled with the ghosts of his past and the dangerous, uncertain shape of their future. She told herself it was survival instinct that kept her standing there, that made her meet his gaze without flinching. But she was lying to herself. A week later, the house was breached. It happened not with a bang, but with a whisper. Amina was in the kitchens overseeing the evening meal preparations when one of the junior maids, a young woman named Emmy, stumbled in, her face pale as parchment. There are men, Emmy stammered, her hand shaking. In the West Garden. They're not ours. Amina's blood went cold. She didn't panic. She acted. She calmly directed the kitchen staff into the large pantry, locking the heavy door behind them. She grabbed a small, sharp paring knife from the block, its weight insignificant but grounding in her palm. Then she went to the security monitor tucked away in the chief steward's office. 2 men, dressed in the dark suits of a rival Yakuza clan, had cornered another maid, Haru, near the koi pond. They weren't being loud. They were quiet, menacing. One of them was holding a phone up, showing Haru a picture. Amina zoomed in. It was a photo of her, taken from a distance, shopping for groceries. They knew who she was. They were using the staff to find her. Her mind raced. Rio was in a meeting downtown. His primary security detail was with him. The skeleton crew at the house would be responding, but the garden was a blind spot, a place of serene beauty designed for peace, not defense. She couldn't wait. She thought about the layout of the house, every corner she had dusted, every floor she had polished. She knew its secrets. She keyed the intercom, patching through only to the security office in the main gatehouse. This is Amina. 2 intruders, West Garden. They are armed. They have Haru. I am creating a diversion at the North Service entrance. Draw them there. The East Gate will be their only unsecured exit. She didn't wait for a response. She ran, her soft-soled shoes silent on the stone floors. She didn't go to the north entrance. She went to the breaker room in the sub-basement. With a single, decisive pull, she killed the power to the entire west wing, plunging the garden and surrounding rooms into absolute darkness. An alarm began to blare, a jarring, ear-splitting shriek. Emergency lights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows. She had created chaos, a fog of war. In the confusion, Haru could escape. The intruders would be disoriented. She made her way back towards the central part of the house, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had crossed a line. She was no longer a maid, a ghost. She had actively participated in the defense of this house. His house. She nearly collided with him in the main hall. Rio. He must have raced back. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, his white shirt was open at the collar, and in his hand, he held a sleek, black pistol. It looked like a natural extension of his arm. His men, a blur of dark suits and lethal intent, were sweeping through the house behind him. His eyes found hers through the dim, flashing light. He took in her flushed face, the small knife, still clutched in her hand. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look angry. He looked something else. Something she couldn't decipher. He strode toward her, grabbing her arm. His grip was like steel. Are you hurt?
No.
Where were you? The breaker room. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by a flicker of disbelief. He pulled her along with him, moving toward his office. Stay with me. The threat was neutralized quickly. The 2 intruders were captured trying to flee through the East Gate, just as she had predicted. The house fell silent once more, the only sound the distant murmur of Rio's men securing the perimeter. He stood before her in the office, the gun now resting on his desk. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlit city outside the window. I brought you into my home to be invisible, he said, his voice low and raw. To be a silent, functioning part of the background. You are the furthest thing from it. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, heavy with a truth that resonated deep in her bones. She had failed at being a ghost. She had become something real, something tangible in his world. I told myself working here was just a job, she confessed, her voice shaking slightly. A way to pay my bills. I was lying. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. Why did you do it, Amina? Why didn't you just hide? They had a picture of me, she said. They were looking for me. This was my fight, too. He was silent for a long time, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical touch. He saw her not as a maid, not as a liability, not as the ghost of a sister. He saw her. The woman who had met his coldness with unflinching resolve. The woman who had used the intimate knowledge of his home not just to clean it, but to defend it. They know you are a weakness, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could no longer conceal. They think because you are close to me, you are a vulnerability they can exploit. He reached out, his fingers gently brushing a stray curl from her forehead. The touch was a brand. They are wrong. You are not my weakness. You are my reason. The final assault came 3 nights later. It was a storm of violence and shattered glass. They came for her, a direct, brutal attack on the heart of the mansion. Rio tried to get her to the panic room, a reinforced vault hidden behind a bookshelf in the library, but they were cut off. Gunfire echoed through the halls. The air grew thick with the smell of cordite. In the chaos, they were separated. Rio was a whirlwind of controlled violence, a dark angel defending his territory. Amina found herself cornered in the grand dining room by two of the attackers. The table she had polished just that morning was now her only cover. They advanced on her, guns raised, cruel smirks on their faces. They thought she was a prize to be taken, a helpless woman to be used as a bargaining chip. She didn't scream. She didn't cower. She remembered cleaning the antique fireplace, noting the loose iron grate of the flue damper. While they were focused on her, she scrambled behind a heavy velvet curtain, fumbling in the darkness. Her fingers found the cold, heavy iron. She pulled it free. One of the men rounded the table. As he reached for her, she swung the grate with all her might, striking his hand. He roared in pain, his gun clattering across the marble floor. The other man raised his weapon, but it was too late. Rio was there. A blur of motion, two precise, silent shots, and the men crumpled to the ground. The fighting was over. The silence that descended was profound, broken only by the sound of their own harsh breathing. The mansion was a ruin. Blood stained the Persian rugs. Bullet holes marred the priceless art on the walls. Rio found her standing in the winter garden, the glass dome shattered, letting in the cold night air. Shards of glass littered the ground like fallen stars. In her hand, she held a single, perfect white orchid, miraculously untouched, from a plant she had carefully tended for months. He walked toward her, his steps crunching on the broken glass. His suit was torn, a dark stain spreading on his sleeve, but his eyes were only for her. He stopped in front of her, his gaze taking in her calm expression, the flower in her hand. She had not waited to be rescued. She had fought. She had survived. She had held her ground in the center of his collapsing world. He looked around at the devastation, at the empire that had almost been brought to its knees. Then his eyes returned to her. "You were never just a maid," he said, his voice thick with a truth that was no longer deniable, no longer hidden. "You are the foundation of this house. Without you, it all falls." It was not a declaration of love. It was something more, an acknowledgement of a debt that could never be repaid. The cost of this night was absolute. Her old life, the one with normal dates and bookstore dreams, was a ghost. It was gone forever. And for him, the price was his fortress of solitude, the cold, empty space he had built around his heart. She had breached it. She was inside. He did not ask her to stay.
He did not need to.
He simply held out his hand. It was not a gesture of rescue or command. It was an offering, an invitation to be his equal in the ruins. She looked from his face to his hand, at the intricate black ink coiling around his wrist, a map of power and pain, of honor and shame. It was the world she now inhabited. Without hesitation, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, a silent, unbreakable oath. The choice was made. Her future was not a quiet, predictable path, but the sharp, dangerous, and beautiful edge of his world. And for the first time, surrounded by wreckage, she felt completely whole.